Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It's been nearly 4 weeks since Stephen Paddock committed the deadliest shooting in modern American history. Tonight we have brand new exclusive information from a government source given to us just hours ago, and it's remarkable. The Las Vegas security guard, the only eyewitness to this shooting, left this country shortly after it took place. We'll tell you where he went and what it may mean in just a minute. But first, the law of unintended consequences remains in force in Washington tonight. An investigation designed to uncover Republican collusion with a foreign power has unearthed just the opposite. We now know that the most powerful Democratic lobbying firm in Washington was at the very center of Russian efforts to shape American politics and policy. The Podesta Group, founded by Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman and his brother, took money from Russian interests to influence the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton's State Department. It turns out there were indeed Russian agents in Washington. They were working with Democrats. Meanwhile, we have also solved much of the mystery around the infamous Trump dossier, that collection of salacious and in many cases totally made-up allegations that BuzzFeed credulously ran earlier this year as a news story. The dossier was assembled by a former British intelligence agent called Chris Steele. Steele was originally paid by a still anonymous Republican donor who was hoping to undermine the Trump campaign during the primaries. We've known that for a while. But what we've just learned, and what has turned this story and Washington itself on its head, is that once the Republican primaries finished, the Trump dossier project was funded by Hillary Clinton's own presidential campaign and also by the DNC. Democrats have been lying about that explicitly for more than a year, but it's true, it turns out. Hillary's former spokesman conceded on television tonight that Hillary herself may have known about it because, of course, she did. More shocking, though, the FBI apparently may have also paid Chris Steele to dig up dirt on Trump. How did they do this? Why did they do this? We still don't know, because so far the FBI has ignored subpoenas sent to them 2 months ago by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. We'll be talking to him later in the show. All of this raises some serious questions. First and most important, is it even legal? There are a number of federal laws that prohibit politicians from paying foreign nationals for campaign work, yet Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee apparently paid Chris Steele for that dossier. Isn't that against the law? Presumably we'll find out fairly soon. Next, why was the FBI involved in this in the way that it was? The agency has 35,000 employees. It's got unmatched resources and expertise. It's the FBI. Why would it even consider going to a private investigator to do research on a president-elect? Keep in mind, this isn't the first time the FBI has outsourced a major investigation. Recall that federal agents never actually examined the DNC servers after they were supposedly hacked by an outside party during the campaign. Instead, the FBI relied on the work of a DNC contractor called CrowdStrike, which assured them and the rest of us that Russia was behind that hacking. But wait, why would the FBI do that? Did anyone at the Justice Department consider that hiring third-party actors with unclear motives to conduct a high-profile investigation might be an excellent way for, say, foreign intelligence operations to sow chaos and promote their agendas? At the very least, wouldn't CrowdStrike's claims be colored by their natural desire to make their employer, the Democratic Party, happy? It's nuts. And by the way, by working so closely with a group conducting partisan research for a partisan political campaign, didn't the FBI compromise its political independence, its all-important political independence? Another thing, to conduct research for the dossier, Chris Steele had extensive contact, of course he did, with Russian sources, some of them connected to the Kremlin directly. So if the Clinton campaign was paying for Steele's research, why weren't they, in effect, colluding with Russia? Irony of ironies. And maybe most important of all, why is the FBI refusing to answer basic questions from Congress? Our government is not supposed to work like that. The FBI is not its own country. It's not a private organization. It isn't elected by voters. It has no inherent legitimacy except to the extent it obeys the laws that citizens, you and me, voted for. The FBI can't decide to ignore the Congress of the United States. That's obstruction. It's also scary. If federal agents with guns aren't accountable to the Congress or to the president they work for, who are they accountable to? Who's really in charge? Suddenly, you're looking at something resembling an occupying army and not a legitimate federal agency. And that's when things start to fall apart. Mark Stein is an author and columnist. He joins us tonight. Mark, I want to talk to you because I know that you're an internationally renowned connoisseur of irony. And so how are you responding to this story which was designed to prove collusion between Republicans and Russia and is now proving the opposite?
Yes, because Trump is in the weird position. He says wacky things from time to time, as we all know, but nothing he says is as wacky as the truth here. This is like one of those slightly over high concept thrillers, Agatha Christie's Murder on the Siberian Express. Everyone is colluding with Russia except Trump. Basically, you've got the Podesta group, you've got the Hillary campaign, you've got the DNC, you've got the FBI, you've got Christopher Steele, who you credit as an ex-MI6 agent. He's not just any old ex-MI6 agent. He's the head of the Russia desk at MI6, which is a pretty big deal. And you were talking about campaign finance laws preventing you paying foreign nationals for federal election campaigns. Whatever the scope of those laws, the core people they were designed to prevent getting a hand in American elections were elite high-level espionage agents from foreign powers. So we have a completely and by the way, not just the Hillary campaign, but as you said earlier, Hillary herself. Hillary, who has been touring the world. She's been at obscure little literary festivals on the Welsh border just a week or two ago, complaining that the Russians colluded with Trump to steal the election away with her, and she's colluding with the Russians to issue this dossier against Trump.
Colluding with the Russians, and apparently with the peripheral involvement of Paul Manafort, who Democrats have been telling us for the last year is this sinister figure with Russia ties. You know, maybe so, sounds like it. But he was working with the Podesta Group, which is the single most powerful Democratic lobbying firm in the city, of course, founded by Hillary's campaign chairman. I mean, you couldn't make it up.
No, and you know, suddenly a lot of things seem clearer. You talked about the FBI, which is supposed to be a policing agency that operates in the interests of the American people. As you say, it's very odd that an agency with almost unlimited resources compared to any equivalent anywhere on the planet is having to outsource a lot of this stuff and actually use the taxpayers' money to pay this British subject for this wacky report. But to me, one of the most disturbing things about this is you'll recall that the Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, asked James Comey, supposedly, to go and have a meeting with Trump and tell Trump that they've got a dossier explaining how he likes to enjoy highly specialized prostitution services in Eastern Europe, and they've got this dossier. And then the minute they've held the meeting, it mysteriously the news of this meeting gets leaked to the press. And I think it's a reasonable inference that Clapper and Comey only actually arranged this meeting with Trump to tell him of the specialized prostitution services this dossier contains about him. It's a reasonable inference that this meeting took place only so that news of it could then be leaked to the press. That's actually extremely deeply disturbing for the intelligence community and the FBI.
And I would, by the way, I agree with you vehemently, and if they were doing this to President Obama, who I did not like, I would say the same thing. You can't have rogue agencies. It's terrifying. Mark, thank you for that perspective.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Well, in an interview just this afternoon, former Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Fallon acknowledged that Hillary herself may have known about the decision to fund the Trump dossier.
Just to be clear, Brian, you have said previously in the last 24 hours you don't believe Hillary Clinton knew about this either. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't asked. I haven't spoken to her. No.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Shouldn't she know? Shouldn't you, someone so high up in the campaign, be informed of this?
Well, I mean, she may have known, but the degree of exactly what she knew is beyond my knowledge.
she may have known. In other words, she absolutely knew. And yet she kept it secret for more than a year. Brad Woodhouse is the former DNC communications director. He ran the pro-Clinton super PAC, Correct the Record. He joins us tonight. Brad, thanks for coming on.
Hey, how you doing?
So, well, I'm baffled, as always, living here in Washington.
Nothing to be baffled about.
She not only kept this from herself, but it was not disclosed publicly. And so here you have a campaign paying a foreign national, some of that money probably going to who knows where, but other foreign nationals, maybe a foreign government, and not disclosing it publicly. I don't think that's legal.
Well, first of all, look, I was running a super PAC that part of our responsibility was to place opposition research on Donald Trump. I wish I'd had this dossier, Tucker. I would have tattooed it to my butt and I would have exposed myself.
Well, sure. No, I'm sure you would have. I mean, you'll traffic in any kind of filth.
Avenue. But here's the thing. Who cares who paid? Remember, it began to be paid by a Republican.
But I thought that's right. It's still anonymous, and we don't know who that is.
A Republican began the research.
No, but hold on. Wait a second. I thought the whole point was these are the Russians we're dealing with here. This is information that came in part from Kremlin-connected Russian officials.
Right. But remember,
and it was used to influence a presidential campaign. I thought that was the very charge Democrats were leveling against Trump.
The point of the opposition research was.
But it's okay when they do it?
It was to identify what was happening with Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. It was to expose
hooker part was the.
It was to expose Donald Trump's connection
so I just want to hold on. Stop for 1 second. Stop for 1 second. Let me just ask if this is what you're arguing. Democrats, hold on.
Let me ask you if this is what you're arguing.
You got to answer my question. No. Here's what I'm asking.
Stop. Hold on. Are you arguing that the Russians were trying to elect Hillary Clinton? Now, Donald Trump.
Can I ask you? May I ask you?
That's crap.
Okay, please. Let me ask you a real question.
Sure.
We now have confirmed, and you just saw Hillary Clinton's spokesman confirming that the Clinton campaign paid money to Fusion GPS, which hired this former British intel officer who got information from the Kremlin, in effect. You're saying that that's okay, that Hillary's campaign used information from the Kremlin to beat Trump because it was exposing Trump's ties to the Kremlin?
First of all, the dossier came out after the election, so I have no knowledge that the campaign.
No. The printed dossier came out. No, hold on. It's an intelligence gathering operation. It comes in fits and spurts.
Right.
So that was the whole point.
Well, you have seen one
but you're seeing
person after another.
But may I ask you?
No,
that's a question. Okay, but look, they paid for it. The information came from the Kremlin. They used it in a political campaign, in a presidential campaign. I thought the whole charge was Trump was using information from the Kremlin to win, but it turns out Hillary was.
The charge is that the Russians interfered in this election, colluding, possibly, that's what's under investigation, with the Trump campaign to elect Donald Trump.
Right. Now,
the Russians weren't cooperating with Christopher Steele to elect Hillary Clinton.
No,
that's an asinine charge.
Well, actually, it's more than a charge. It's proven by the facts of what we're talking about. The Russians were giving information to Steele because they believed.
Well, Steele was working sources.
Let me finish my sentence.
Okay.
Everyone admits that the Russians gave information to the Hillary campaign for pay. They paid Fusion and Steele. Information from the Russians goes to the Hillary campaign to beat Trump. You don't see that as collusion. That seems like the textbook.
That is opposition research.
Oh,
that is opposition research.
So what I needed
entirely different.
What I needed
entirely different.
Good. Then
when Russians are buying ads to influence the election.
Makes sense. I guess what I needed was yet another lesson in Washington vocabulary. So it looked to me like collusion, or what was last week collusion, is now opposition
research. We're talking about collusion, interfering in the campaign.
I get it. Right. That's collusion. But when it's elect Hillary, it's opposition.
And Tucker, let's get to the bottom of what this is about.
I get
this. This is about undermining the FBI investigation.
What it's about
because Mueller is in hot pursuit of Trump. Right. So all of a sudden you got all these congressional investigations.
Actually, if I can just correct you, what it's about is George Orwell, who wrote the textbook for using language to achieve political ends.
Look, 17 agencies said that Russians colluded to help elect Trump. None of them said that they were trying to elect Hillary Clinton, Tucker. Not one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Missing hard drives, mysterious burglaries, bungled timelines, and now we have brand new information from a government source. The Las Vegas security guard, who was the only eyewitness to this massacre from within the building, fled the country. Why did investigators let him go? Where did he go? We've got details in just a minute. Today, the president likened the Obama administration's Uranium One deal to the Watergate scandal that brought down President Nixon in 1974.
The uranium sale to Russia and the way it was done so underhanded with tremendous amounts of money being passed, I actually think that's Watergate.
He chairs the House Intelligence Committee. He's been trying to investigate both the Uranium One deal and the mysterious Trump dossier that we now know was funded in part by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Chairman Nunes joins us tonight. Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming on.
It's great to be here.
So one of the most terrifying facts that we've learned in the past 2 days is that the FBI apparently was one of the funders of this dossier, even after Trump was elected president. How can that be?
Well, let's take one step at a time here, Tucker. So we don't know that yet. Part of the reason why we don't know that is because we have actually subpoenaed FBI and Justice Department to give us this information. What we know so far, that's we believe to be factual, from the Washington Post piece, is that the Democrats paid for the dossier. They paid Fusion GPS for the dossier. We believe that to be true, but we have Fusion GPS that pled the fifth, so they refused to testify. They're now trying to block us from getting information to get to financial records of who they paid, who could they have paid, who could they have hired, all those sorts of things. They're trying to block us on that. So
on what grounds, by the way? On what grounds could you say we don't have a right to know that?
Well, I mean, look, we've subpoenaed the documents, and we're waiting. We have the House General Counsel now representing us in court. But when you plead the fifth and then you go to court to try to block us from getting the information, and then it gets leaked to the Washington Post that the DNC and the Hillary campaign paid for this, I think we have a problem. Now I think the next focus is going to be on whether or not did the FBI use this dossier to get any warrants? Did they use it to open up a counterintelligence investigation? And if they did, if they're using unverified information to open up inquiries into American citizens, I think we have a big problem.
From a political campaign. I mean, the purpose of this information,
from a political campaign,
which is unverified, in some cases demonstrably false, was to affect the outcome of an election. So it's a pretty simple question. You're the chairman of one of the most powerful committees in the House of Representatives. Why can't you get an answer?
You would think we would be able to, and that is the problem.
Was that constitutional?
This is why the Speaker of the House came out this morning and called on DOJ to provide this information immediately to the House of Representatives, and this is why we're in court now, just trying to get this information. And look, this has been since March. It's not like this is new. We didn't just stumble into this. You know, these subpoenas were issued, I think, almost 60 days ago.
But the FBI is not its own country. It can't make its own unilateral decisions, right?
Last time I checked, it was the United States Congress that created FBI.
So is there anything more terrifying than the prospect of an armed rogue agency?
No. No, and I think that's the challenge here, is if you had an unverified dossier paid for by political opponents, in this case the Democratic Party, that then the FBI is taking and using to open up investigations into a campaign, right, or into to other Americans, we are on a slippery slope. I mean, I think this is what you see in third world countries where the party in power uses the intelligence services for their political gain. You don't see that in the United States of America.
I mean, there's a new FBI director. There are, lots of FBI officials that go on television. Has anybody from the FBI publicly explained why they're not letting the House Intelligence Committee know this information?
No, they have not. Not yet.
That's really upsetting. So the Uranium One scandal, we now know that a Democratic lobbying firm in Washington, the Podesta Group, was engaged in lobbying on behalf of these interests. And we know that the Clinton family foundations took over $100 million from board members of Uranium One. Is anybody going to get to whether the obvious happened? That was a quid pro quo. They paid, they got the deal ratified by federal agencies. We get to the bottom of that.
So here's what I think is disturbing and what we're looking for first. So the new information here, a lot of people are asking, well, what happened? You know, this was 7 years ago. What happened? So first of all, you had Republicans back in 2010 wrote in opposition to the sale of uranium-1. Then we now have information, this is the new information. We have informants who have said that there was an open FBI DOJ investigation. We have people who have told us this. We don't know if it's true yet. But if it's true, shortly after that, so if you have an open investigation, how do 9 cabinet-level secretaries approve a sale? And then you have all the questions that you raise, you know, was the Clinton Foundation involved in this? What was, you know, there was millions of dollars.
And where was American national security and American interest in this? Not present. Mr. Chairman, thank you for coming on, and good luck getting that information.
We'll get it, one way or another.
Just a few hours ago, a source provided us a document proving that Las Vegas security guard, Jesus Campos, left this country just days after being the only witness within the hotel to America's worst massacre in modern history. Well, we know where he went, and we will tell you next. We received this document from a confidential source this afternoon. It's a Customs and Border Patrol form, and it shows that Jesus Campos entered the United States from Mexico at the San Ysidro border crossing in San Diego County almost exactly to the hour 1 week after the Las Vegas shooting at the beginning of October. Now, the document does not reveal how long Campos had been in Mexico. Our source told us that Campos entered the U.S. at the same crossing in January of this year. At that time, he was driving his own vehicle with Nevada plates. And yet, in this document from a little over 2 weeks ago, Campos was driving what appears to be a rental car with California plates. Now, this information raises a number of questions about the Las Vegas investigation and the crime itself. Jesus Campos is the only eyewitness to the biggest mass shooting in modern American history. At the time he was in Mexico, the press was reporting that investigators thought Stephen Paddock, may have had an accomplice in these killings. Why did authorities allow Campos to leave the country just days after the shooting while the investigation was still chaotic and, of course, ongoing? How did Campos, who reportedly had a gunshot wound to the leg from a high-powered rifle round, manage to travel to Mexico? Did he fly? Did he drive? Was his employer aware that he left the country? Were investigators aware? Did they facilitate the trip? What day did Campos get to Mexico? How was he able to drive back for hundreds of miles from the San Diego border back to Las Vegas? Why did he take a rental car instead of his own car? The union that represents Campos told us they were aware that he left the country. They claim it was a pre-planned visit. Why did it take a government leak for the rest of us to find that out? Why has MGM been so intent on controlling availability to Campos, booking him on the Ellen DeGeneres show and shielding him from press inquiries? Why did he appear with a co-worker in the Ellen interview rather than solo? Why did Ellen ask only leading softball questions? Why have so many people gone to so much trouble to shape the story of Jesus Campos? ABC spoke to Campos on October 4th. Was he in Mexico when they talked to him? Did they know where he was when they talked to him? What do we actually know about Jesus Campos? For example, is he really a licensed security guard? We checked today, and it turns out he's not registered with the state of Nevada's Private Investigators Licensing Board. Confused by this, we called the Clark County Sheriff to find out what license is required to be a security guard at a Las Vegas casino. The sheriff's office refused to tell us this. Jesus Campos is a victim, the spokesman said. We don't speak about victims. Naturally, we repeated the question. He became angry. He started yelling and ultimately hung up on us, which raises the question, why won't authorities answer basic questions about Jesus Campos? And here are a few more. Does Jesus Campos have a criminal record? Not attacking him. It's an honest and obvious question. What exactly did he do for the hotel? Had he ever had previous contact with Stephen Paddock? How exactly was Campos injured? Countless press reports claim he was shot in the leg with a rifle round from an AR-15 style rifle, probably a NATO 5.56 round. That bullet travels at 3 times the speed of a handgun round. It could easily destroy a man's leg and often does. Given that, how could Campos possibly have driven 700 miles from Las Vegas to the Mexican border and back less than a week later? And then there's Stephen Paddock, the shooter. We still know essentially nothing about him. Even the most basic questions about his behavior remain unanswered, such as, how did he get access to the hotel's freight elevator? How many other hotel guests had that access? Does surveillance video from the casino show Paddock entering the elevator alone or with others? Had he used that elevator before? If so, how often and why was he using that elevator? More broadly, had Stephen Paddock ever previously appeared on the radar of the FBI? Here was a man gambling millions of dollars and stockpiling weapons and ammunition. His name was all over federal databases. Nobody in law enforcement noticed him? We learned today that Paddock's computer is missing its hard drive. Why did it take nearly a month for investigators to tell us that? Did they just find out themselves? We don't know. What do we really know about Paddock or his family? His brother was recently arrested on child pornography charges. Was that part of a separate investigation? Was it related to this case? How many family members does he have exactly? Was he in regular contact with them? Did they have any reason to believe he was planning an attack? And by the way, where's his girlfriend? We could go on. The point is, this story gets murkier by the day, and that is the opposite of what is supposed to happen. It's impossible to know exactly what is going on with the Vegas shooting. We're not going to speculate. But it's obvious that there is lying and incompetence at the heart of it. Joining us now is former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. So, Dan, why would investigators allow Jesus Campos, who again was the sole eyewitness that we know of to the shooting from within the building, to leave the country shortly after while the investigation is still going on? I'm baffled by that.
It's very strange, Tucker. I mean, think about it. There's really no guarantee he's ever going to return. He's not under arrest. He's not under any court order to stay in the country. I mean, they're limited legally what they can do to order him to stay, but it's just confusing. I mean, even I was thinking about this before we went on this segment here, and I'm thinking even the most innocent of explanations, right? I mean, he's a witness and a victim of one of the most horrific crimes in American history. Obviously, incredibly psychologically traumatizing. An innocent explanation, maybe he has family down there he's visiting, he needed some time. But to go to Mexico right after the crime when you are the sole eyewitness to potentially the crime of the century, and as you brought up in the segment, you have a pretty significant injury, a 5.56 or 2.23 round to the leg, is really beyond perplexing. There's no convenient explanation for it.
Well, I don't think it's possible. I don't think if you were hit with that round squarely in your leg, you'd be going anywhere because it would have destroyed your leg. But I don't mean to impugn the character of Jesus Campos. I don't know anything about the man. I felt sorry for him. I still do. He was injured. Sure. But the behavior of the people around him is so weird, and weird in a specific way. They're trying to control access to him. They're trying to control the story about him. They're clamping down on information about him and his actions. Why would they be doing that? Is it MGM doing that? What is going on?
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. I'm not, neither am I. I'm certainly not trying to impugn his character either. I mean, this guy was a victim of this crime as well. But that doesn't make the questions go away. The only explanation I can think of from the beginning, the genesis of all this, this fugue state we're in right now with this, because we had more answers about San Bernardino and Orlando in 24 hours than we have had in this case in weeks, is that there has to be some kind of friction between the parent company of Mandalay due to the potential for mass lawsuits and the Bureau, the FBI that's investigating this. There's no other convenient explanation. That explains a lot of the timeline discrepancies. That also explains, as you just said, and you're correct, I think this limited and controlled access to Campos, and a reason why the parent company may not have had a problem with him leaving to leave the country for a couple days.
They may have facilitated it, abetted it. I mean, that would not shock me at all. But it doesn't explain the behavior of, for example, the Clark County Sheriff. Our producer, Charlie Cougar, called over there today to ask a simple question about licensing. This guy doesn't seem to have had a license as a security guard. You know, whatever. What are the rules? Yeah. And they were so defensive, and they yelled at him and hung up. Yeah. The spokesmen don't typically act that way when they're asked a simple question. What is that about?
Yeah, well, especially from a major media outlet. I mean, it's not like you were calling from a local blog. I mean, this is a credible media outlet that reports on stories like this all the time. And Tucker, we have to remember, this is, I get it. We all respect law enforcement's role in this. We understand. But this was a crime perpetrated on the American people. People are justifiably concerned about why it happened, and we have no answers. You have to expect there's going to be profound media interest in this. And yeah, answering like that doesn't help.
Right. I mean, I respect law enforcement, but if you want respect, behave in a way that earns it. Really quickly, this guy, it's not implausible he came, Paddock, to the attention of federal authorities. Gambling winnings, I think, are reported over a certain number. He was churning a lot of money through the casinos. No one's asked exactly, had he come to the attention of federal authorities? I know he hadn't been arrested, but do you think that's plausible that they knew who he was?
Yeah, I mean, if once you deposit $10,000 or more, you have to fill out a currency transaction report at a bank. He may have had suspicious activity reports in banks as well. I don't think this guy was a ghost to the federal law enforcement system. I think as information comes out, you're going to see more about that.
I agree with that, and I think there's some butt covering going on, just a guess. Dan, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Federal government is giving away millions of work permits to people who don't live here. In fact, a lot of them are illegally here. Why would they be doing that? That's next. In the past year, the federal government has awarded close to 2 million work permits to refugees, asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, and others who have arrived in the U.S. without having a job lined up. Why are they doing that? Wendy Asifu is an education professor at Johns Hopkins University, and she joins us tonight to explain. Wendy, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So there are tens of millions of Americans who are out of the workforce, about 100 million actually. Some of them don't want jobs, some of them do. Why, given that, there's an unemployment crisis, it's not reflected in the numbers. Why would we be letting millions of people who are here illegally have work permits?
So it's really interesting, right? Because we have these undocumented workers. They come in, they make up about 5.2% of the U.S. labor force, and they get this work visa called the Employment Act document, and they work with this. But the interesting thing here is discretionary. It can be revoked at any time. So if we look at the makeup of this, 17% of that group is individuals who are looking for asylum, and another quarter or so is the DACA employees. But if you're looking at this from a business lens and trying to make a business case of it, what you would say is that the economics of it sort of makes sense here. And then the reason why is that, when we look at the numbers, we see that if you are working and you're one of the undocumented workers, you've actually made up more money and put into the Social Security fund more than you're needed in the country. So it's like $300 billion.
But that, I mean, that's not actually happening. But what's so striking to me is when I was a kid, the left cared about workers and their condition and wages, and Cesar Chavez was out there, arguing on behalf of his members for the United Farm Workers Union. Now, every liberal I talk to about immigration says, well, it's good for the bottom line. Employers like it. It's good for shareholders.
Yeah. I mean,
have you noticed that change?
I have, but I think it's really important for us not to make this a political conversation. Because if you look at it, right, you have states like Texas, Georgia, Arizona, even North Carolina. These are states that Donald Trump won in the election, and they actually have the highest number of, undocumented workers working in their states.
Maybe that's why he won those states.
Maybe that's why.
Because people are really frustrated. So let me ask you this, though, as a philosophical matter.
Sure.
Doesn't any government owe its first allegiance, loyalty to its own citizens? Look out for them first. So if I've got 4 kids, if I'm letting my kids starve but giving food to my neighbor's kids, maybe I'm shirking my duty. Isn't that kind of what we're doing here? We're ignoring our unemployed and employing the rest of the world? Well,
it depends on how you look at it, right? Because the narrative can be flipped on its head. Because quite frankly, if you look at individuals who get an H-2B visa, the foundation requires that you advertise that job and you have tried to fill that job in your own state at the wage in which you're offering. And only then, when you can prove that, are you then allowed to bring in others from out of the country.
But here's the thing, like our schools are terrible, the middle of the country's dying, 60,000 people died of drug ODs last year. What's the incentive to make our schools better and the heartland better if we can just import people who are educated in India? Nothing against them.
Right.
But why would you ever make American schools better when you can just import the talent?
Well, as an educator, I will say that there is enough room for those who live abroad and those who live here. And I think that our school system is something that is in dire straits right now and it needs to be focused on. And I don't think that we need to look at other people and say, let's strengthen our economy with these other individuals while negating that we have so much talent in our own country.
But wait a second. I mean, if employers really felt like they had no option but to hire Americans, if I'm J.P. Morgan or Westinghouse, or if I'm Johns Hopkins University, I would say, hey, school district, you better start turning out some people who can work for me, who are capable of it. I'm going to invest in the schools. I'm going to make them better. Now it's like, it doesn't matter. I'm just call it Bangalore and bring in impressive, willing workers who will work for less. They've already got their engineering degrees. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I understand where you're going with it, but it's negating the fact that there has been individuals who say, you know what, we want to hire American workers, and then the American workers and say, for this wage, I will not do the job. And that's where it gets muddy.
Damn,
right?
those American workers. They just want too much.
No,
those Americans just want too much.
No,
That's their
we don't
problem.
want too much.
Yeah.
We're a great country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Professor.
Thank you so much.
Our next guest says the West is on the brink of destruction. We face a terrifying threat. It's not Islamic extremism, it's white nationalism. She says that argument next. Welcome back. I want to give you a quick news update that came in during the commercial break. We've been reporting on the Uranium One deal/scandal. Took place in 2010 during the Obama administration when a Russian company took control of a huge percentage of our uranium reserves. At that time, as we've told you, there was a federal investigation, Justice Department investigation into bribery, Russians bribing Americans to get that deal through, and there was an informant at the center of that. He has not been allowed to speak to Congress. He's under a gag order. That gag order has ended about 5 minutes ago. The Justice Department announcing he will be allowed to speak to congressional committees, so expect more news on that story. Now, author Sasha Polakoff-Saransky says a specter is haunting the West, the specter of white nationalism. In his new book, Go Back to Where You Came From, The Backlash Against Immigration and the Fate of Western Democracy. Polakoff-Saransky says the biggest threat to democracy isn't jihadism or mass immigration from non-Western societies. Instead, the greatest threat, he says, is right-wing politicians exploiting public hostility to new arrivals. And that, he says, will destroy free society. Sasha Polakoff-Saransky joins us tonight. Sasha, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So, I mean, I guess the 30,000-foot question is, can you be surprised that when you change a society as old as a European society, or even one as old as ours, completely through immigration in a short period of time, that some people won't like it and that there will be a backlash against it? Does that surprise you?
I'm not surprised at all, Tucker, and I don't believe in absolute open borders, and I absolutely understand why people are unsettled, why they're resentful, and why they're upset. I've reported in Germany and France and Holland and Denmark, people are angry about how their neighborhoods are changing, and they have legitimate grievances and legitimate fears, and often parties on the center left and on the left haven't listened to them for years. So I get why people are resentful. What I'm concerned about and what worries me is that we have a new group of politicians in far-right populist parties that are exploiting those fears and those grievances and those resentments to take our societies back 100 years and in a very dangerous direction. And when I say that white nationalism is a greater threat than jihadists, I'm acknowledging that terrorism is a huge threat to our societies, but great democracies persevere and they manage. Look at the UK, look at France after the attacks, look at us after 9/11. But if insiders within our societies, nativist politicians, start to stir hatred and resentment towards immigrant groups and refugee groups, we know where that has taken us in the past, Tucker, and it's dangerous and it's divisive. And I think that we need leaders and a news channel that will come out and unequivocally, swiftly, and forcefully condemn those ideas whenever they emerge.
Yeah, I think your point is hysterical and silly. Part of it is real. I mean, part of what you're saying is totally real. No, you're right. I mean, there has been a rise in nationalism around the world, and it's a reaction against. So it
doesn't bother you, Tucker, that people like David Duke, the former Klan leader, comes out and says that he sees himself and his followers?
See, this is the part that makes me take you less. Hold on, let me finish. It's hard to take you seriously when you take David Duke seriously, who was a marginal figure with no power over anyone. And so when you hold him up as some sort of harbinger of the future, I know you're ridiculous. Whereas a second ago, you actually kind of had me listening intently when you said,
Tucker,
this is what's happening in Europe.
Duke
because it
and
is.
Richard Spencer have emerged into the public square. We need to have a debate about immigration in this country, and I think you and I agree about that. But David Duke should not have any part in that debate.
But he doesn't actually. And what you're doing in fear-mongering like this is shutting down that debate, actually. I mean,
Tucker, what happened in Charlottesville? What happened in Gainesville a few days ago when people fired into into a crowd of protesters. Doesn't that scare you? Isn't that a threat to our country?
Well,
and our democracy?
I guess what you're looking at is a completely myopic picture of what's actually happening. You're seeing a lot of drama because there's massive social change in this country. It's coming from all directions, and some of the directions are not even possible to understand. But it's not as simple as the rise of white nationalism. It's that you get a volatile society when you change it overnight, and you don't give people a chance to weigh in on whether they like it or not.
To weigh in, Tucker, but what I am talking about is politicians who exploit those fears. It's one thing to say, in Germany, for instance, we can't take in 1 million immigrants in 1 year. That's impossible to integrate no matter how rich and how good your intentions.
What do you think you're going to get?
I agree with that. I agree with that. But when politicians emerge in a country like Germany that has a history of genocide, it causes concern.
So, Sasha, I got 10 seconds,
Tucker,
but whose fault is that? Why aren't you blaming Angela Merkel for this? She did it, but she gets a pass somehow?
It is the fault of manipulative and opportunistic politicians who are emerging to stoke people's fears.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you for that. That was interesting. More on the breaking news from Russia. There's an actual Russia scandal, as we told you. We've got more on it next. A breaking development in the Uranium One story for you. The Justice Department has now lifted a gag order preventing an FBI informant from telling Congress what he knows about the Uranium One deal. That gag order had been imposed by President Obama's attorneys general, Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, both of them. The informant's attorney says he can tell what all the Russians were talking about during the time that these bribery payments were made. That was to get the deal done in 2010. Obviously, look forward to hearing what he has to say. We will cover it carefully on this show. That's it for us. Tune in every night to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Sean Hannity.